Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today's video, running back rankings, the top 30 on the week for week 11. I must admit, this is a tough week when it comes to matchups. We'll run through these matchups for these running backs, where I have them ranked. This one was very tough for me, very tough. Let me know in the comments how bad I did with some of these guys. There's a lot of people that love to do that in each and every video, so I'm open to it. But we'll go through the top 30, some guys you should sit, some guys you should start. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. And of course, go check out our partners over at Betfred. If you sign up, that link is down below in the description. Deposit $50, bet $50 on any market. You're going to get $250 in free bets. I would recommend tonight, no Betfred boost for the Thursday night game, but I will drop my favorite play, which is undoubtedly the Titans +3 on the road in Green Bay. Obviously a tough environment to play in, but this is a team, no matter the weather, that can kind of come together at Lambeau Field. This is a team that can take care of that. I think they'll run the ball plenty in this game. And the recipe for the Packers to be able to win is putting the ball on the ground. They just don't have enough at the wide receiver position in my mind. And this Titans team is one of the best in the NFL against the run. I think this team will have a tough time running the ball. We'll need to air it out. I think the Titans can cover that number at +3, and I wouldn't be afraid to hit them on the money line as well over at Betfred. So if you guys are betting on the game on Thursday, be sure to sign up and deposit at Betfred and take advantage of that awesome welcome offer they have. Make sure you're taking advantage of it before the season is up. Let's get to the top 6 for this week, starting with Mr. Saquon Barkley going against the Detroit Lions, who are 30th in fantasy points allowed to the position. Need you say more about Saquon, who's getting like 30 carries a game? What was he at, 31 last week? Just a ton of volume for him. Easy play here as the number 1 guy. At 2, Derrick Henry. I already touched on it. This is a Packers team that I think is terrible against the run. Derrick Henry is in for a big night on Thursday. Packers are 30th in DVOA and 22nd in fantasy points allowed to running backs. A good matchup here for Henry. At 3, Austin Eckler. Eckler going against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are a good matchup as well for running backs, 23rd in fantasy points allowed. The big thing here to note with Eckler is they are allowing 7.9 receptions per game to the running back position. Eckler in the last matchup against Kansas City had 9 receptions. I haven't looked at his prop for this game. It's probably not out quite yet. The Sunday nighter props don't tend to come out till later on Friday usually. But I bet you he's listed at like 5.5, 6.5 receptions. Because again, I don't think Keenan Allen and Mike Williams will play in this game. So Eckler is a great play against the Chiefs. Jonathan Taylor in at 4. This is where things started to get tough for me. Taylor going against the Eagles. And I think for the Eagles being without Davis in the middle for what it looks to be another week, this team has not been good against the run. We saw the Commanders, who weren't incredibly efficient, but they did enough to possess the ball, move the chains, and hang on to time of possession in this game. I think Taylor, once again, we saw it last week. I think Indy will lead on the run game again in this matchup, and they should. Philadelphia is 28th in rushing DVOA on the season. At number 5, Nick Chubb. This is a tough matchup for Chubb. Last week I had him ranked fair bit lower. Again, getting clowned for that. Thought that was an excellent call in that game. Chubb, if it wasn't for the 1 breakaway run for a touchdown, he would have absolutely bombed. I was on his under rushing yards on Sunday. If you guys tune into the stream at 11 a.m. every Sunday morning, that was one of my favorite plays on the day, was Chubb under rushing yards. This is another tough matchup. 10th in fantasy points allowed are the Buffalo Bills. Chubb, though, is this offense. I think they'll still be relying on him. And he proved in that tough matchup that he was still able to save the week. So I still have him as a top 5 option this week. At 6, Josh Jacobs. The Broncos are a very good pass defense, but they can't score offensively. So I think the Raiders will be in this game all throughout, and McDaniels wants to run the ball a ton. We've been seeing it with Jacobs' volume, but this team has been throwing the ball a lot. I did talk about it in our previous video about the worst running back schedules for the end of the year. Jacobs is on that list. And this team's been throwing the ball in like 64% of plays, but that usually is because of trailing game scripts. Here, I don't think that'll be the case. So I think Jacobs is still a good play. Even if this Denver defense is good, they're 20th in DVOA against the run, so not as good against the run. Christian McCaffrey comes in Dalvin Cook, as we flip over to the rest of the top 12, is in at 7 against the Cowboys. The Cowboys have been very good in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but I think Dalvin Cook, who had a great week last week, should have got the ball probably a little bit more in that game against Buffalo. But the Cowboys are 26th in rush defense grade from PFF. I don't think their run defense is that great, but they've been able to be good in the fantasy department because teams haven't been scoring touchdowns on the ground. I think that could change here. Cook is still a good play. At 8, Christian McCaffrey against the Cardinals. Look, McCaffrey, typically, if he's healthy, he's like a top 3 option. I'm a little bit worried about Elijah Mitchell's usage. We talked about it in the waiver wire video, actually in our best fantasy football schedules for running backs earlier this week. This split is concerning to me. Mitchell getting some work in the red zone, a good amount of work in the red zone, the majority of the work in the red zone, it looked like. But McCaffrey, the Cardinals, 24th in fantasy points allowed, 28th in run defense grade. This is still an excellent matchup for McCaffrey. Still a top 12 guy, no doubt about it, because of his work as a receiver as well. And he still significantly outsnapped Mitchell. At 9, Joe Mixon. Mixon going against the Steelers, who are 20th in fantasy points allowed, but 6th in rush DVOA, 7th in run defense grade, and getting TJ Watt back, I think, helps this run defense immensely. We saw it in that opener against the Bengals as well when the Steelers knocked them off to start the season. Mixon, volume is still really good, opportunity still all there. That is the thing that gives him a decent floor here, but I think he might be in for what is typically an inefficient week for Mixon. At 10, probably the most surprising ranking I have here on the list is Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards in at 10. John Harbaugh did say that he expects Gus Edwards to be available this week coming off the hamstring injury, and they've got an excellent matchup, and it's a team that's very banged up, especially with the pass catchers. Mark Andrews could be back. We know Rashad Bateman out for the season. This is a team that's running tons of heavy sets. They've got 2 tight ends on the field on over 50% of plays. They want to run the ball, and if Edwards is available, we've seen that they make him the number 1 option and will probably lean to not playing a guy like Kenyon Drake as often as they've had to lately. So I really like Edwards in this matchup because the Panthers are 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs and 22nd in rush DVOA. At 11, Dameon Pierce. Pierce is in my mind, which is another tough matchup. It feels like he just can't get out of these difficult matchups lately. But the Commanders are 18th in fantasy points allowed, but they're 2nd in rush DVOA. They've got a great front 4. They're solid against the run. We saw it against the Eagles this past week as well. But Pierce has such great volume that just elevates him so much. And I think there's still going to be opportunities for this team to score, and Pierce will be that guy to convert those opportunities. At 12, Brian Robinson. I got Brian Robinson in the top 12 this week. That is a shocker as I'm just looking at it myself. But again, these matchups are tough for some of these top options. I see this as the Commanders once again leaning on the ground game like they did against Philadelphia, and Robinson is the one they want to go to inside the red zone to convert those scoring opportunities, and he's their number 1 guy on the ground in terms of play volume. Robinson going against this Houston defense that's dead last in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Robinson is a guy that's so, in my mind, dependent on matchup, and when he's in a great matchup, I can elevate him to this spot, to be honest with you. So I like Robinson a lot this week. Okay, getting into the top 24, Devin Singletary at 13 going against the Browns. The Browns are 28th in fantasy points allowed. Josh Allen obviously playing through injury. They used Devin Singletary quite a bit last week, and this is a much better matchup than the Vikings were. So I think Singletary, who has a clear edge over James Cook and Nyheim Hines, still an excellent play. I think an excellent play this week. The Browns have not been good against the run this season. We saw Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert find the end zone this past week. At 14, Alvin Kamara going against the Rams. The Rams are 1st in run defense grade and a top 10 unit in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs. Man, this offense in New Orleans just looks awful with Andy Dalton at QB, and he's back at QB again this week. Dennis Allen the defensive head coaches tend to just lean so much onto players that just will take care of the ball. And Andy Dalton hasn't even done a good job of taking care of the ball either. So I'm concerned with Kamara, but again, a player that gives volume, which elevates the floor, but not excited. Not as much an excitement to play him, but of course, I still think you should play him. At 15, Cordero Patterson. Look, the snap counts from last week were concerning. I had a couple questions in the Discord and on the YouTube channel here of what to do and how I am feeling about Cordero Patterson. Look, I don't think quite yet I'm very concerned. I was surprised to see him outsnapped by Tyler Algier, but I do still think Patterson is their number 1 option. I mean, he's looked the best and most efficient of any of their backs. I think Patterson still has the control of this offense. I think in a game here where maybe they get back to a script that leads them more to being potentially leading or things being tight. It wasn't that case against Carolina. Things got away from them pretty quickly. And we saw Patterson run a little bit more routes as opposed to being in the backfield, but just didn't see those targets. So Patterson, Chicago, 29th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 30th in run defense grade, and they've been giving up a ton of points lately. So great opportunity for Patterson to find the end zone too. At 16, Ramondre Stevenson going against the Jets. The Jets have been an elite run defense, top 5 in run defense grade, 7th in fantasy points allowed. I like Ramondre. Damien Harris is definitely going to be back. I think he was missing the previous week with an illness, so that won't be a problem here. But Ramondre definitely has the clear lead in this backfield, and I don't see that changing any longer. He's going to be an RB2 rest of season for sure. Deonta Foreman at 17. The Panthers going against the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens have been pretty good in terms of fantasy points allowed to backs, but Carolina's going to lean on this ground game. Looks like Baker Mayfield will be at QB. I expect Foreman to still get plenty of volume. We saw Chuba Hubbard come back, and that didn't have any effect really on Foreman's opportunities, which is a good sign for him. So, the Ravens are 19th in rush DVOA. Pretty good group, but still one I'd like to play Foreman in. Another guy I'd really like to play in his matchup, Elijah Mitchell. We talked about McCaffrey's concern. I think these guys are like a two-headed monster at this point. Mitchell could be converting some touchdowns. Like I mentioned, the Cardinals, 24th in fantasy points allowed, 28th in run defense grade. At 19, David Montgomery. Montgomery certainly gets an elevation, and he could be someone to pay attention to at the tail end of the year if Khalil Herbert, who's now, I believe, on IR and out for a bit. Montgomery could end up being like a league winner type player. I'm pretty sure from what I remember, his matchups late season are actually quite good. I would double check that if you're looking to acquire him. But going against the Falcons here is the number one option, and without Khalil Herbert, there's a massive opportunity for him here to be a very good running back rest of season. It's a team that obviously puts a priority on running the football, even with the breakout of Justin Fields that's come on the ground. Atlanta 21st in fantasy points allowed to backs and 25th in rush DVOA. At 20 is Aaron Jones. I mentioned that I'm very concerned about the Packers' ability to run the ball in this game, and I've indicated that in these rankings. Tennessee, 3rd in fantasy points allowed to running backs and 1st in rushing DVOA. I think this team has to lean on the air, and if Aaron Jones can really get involved in the pass game, that can save him this week. But this team isn't giving their running backs enough opportunities to score touchdowns in the red zone. They're throwing the ball a ton in the red zone, so I don't think Jones is going to have a big week this week whatsoever. At 21, Jamal Williams. Williams going against the New York Giants. The Giants 17th fantasy points allowed to running backs, but they've allowed the 7th most rushing yards to running backs on the season. They just haven't seen opponents score. And again, that comes down to just not a lot. None of their games have been high scoring. There's just not a lot of plays, not a lot of opportunities. But Williams is the guy in the red zone. If the Lions have any opportunities to score in short distance, Jamal Williams will get those touches. I would be confident playing him because the Giants haven't been that great against the run. And again, Williams is the guy if there's any scoring opportunities. At 22, Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco going against the Chargers, and the Chargers are so badly beat up by injuries in that interior of their D-line. Staley said he was searching high and low across the NFL to find D-line depth. They made an addition off of, I think, the Browns practice squad, and they had to send 2 more guys to season-ending IR. So I think this is going to be easy sledding here for Kansas City if they want to go to the ground, and Pacheco is the guy they're going to go to for those rushing attempts. So I like Pacheco this week. At 23, Tony Pollard. Again, I'm setting this up as if Ezekiel Elliott isn't playing. This is a really tough matchup. The Vikings are very good against the run, 5th in fantasy points allowed and 2nd in run defense grade. This is a very tough matchup for Pollard, one I'm not sure I want to play him in. At 24, running out the top 24, Miles Sanders going against the Colts. The Colts 5th in rushing DVOA, 16th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. It's a tough matchup as well here. I think this team is better off leaning on the air. And Sanders is someone who can get decent volume, but is still being spelled at opportunities with Kenneth Gainwell. So in a good matchup, I tend to really like him, but in bad ones, this is kind of where I like to see him. At 25, Antonio Gibson. I'm really high on Brian Robinson this week. You could be equally as high on Antonio Gibson, but I do think it's Brian Robinson who gets the opportunities to score, and the Houston Texans are allowing over 1 touchdown a game to the running back position. But Gibson still is going to get touches and opportunity. I still like him this week, but more as like a back-end RB2. At 26, DeAndre Swift. It's just a wait and see with DeAndre Swift. If you really need to play him, you can, but I would probably lean against it. It's just Jamal Williams has the edge. That's just plain simple. Like until we see it, I just wouldn't play him. It's just far too risky. 27, James Conner. You've been listening. You're probably waiting, wondering where he is. Yeah, this is where I have him. Like Conner going against San Francisco, 5th in run defense grade, and 1st in fantasy points allowed to running backs. They just don't give up touchdowns, yards to anybody this season in the NFL. So I don't think it's going to change with Conner, who's not really that efficient and needs those goal line touches to be able to be successful in fantasy week to week. Najee Harris at 28. Harris benefited from a great ground game. They finally had it going against the Saints. I'm now kind of a little bit down on the Saints in terms of their run defense, but I think Cincinnati's is pretty good, who they have this week. 11th in fantasy points allowed, 12th in rushing DVOA. If you drafted Harris, you probably need to play him, but just expectations just really need to be adjusted. At 29, Tyler Algier, going against Chicago, 29th in fantasy points allowed, 30th in run defense grade. This is a good matchup here for Algier. I think I have him on a bunch of teams right now. Still someone I think you can play. Honestly, I should maybe even have him ahead of Connor and Harris now that I'm looking at these rankings over again, maybe even Swift. So definitely I think you should play Algier in this game. At 30, Michael Carter. New England, 2nd in fantasy points allowed. I don't think they've allowed a single rushing touchdown this year. 19th in run defense grade. Carter, a tough matchup. We saw these teams match up a few weeks ago, and there just wasn't a lot of points to go around. So just fairly low on these both James Robinson and Michael Carter in this matchup. Some of the players that missed out on the rankings, anyone in LA. It could be it is a decent matchup against Arizona, but I don't really have much reason to want to play. To want to play any of them because the splits are there. They can't run it efficiently. I think Kyron Williams is the guy I'm highest on. He's my RB35. Damian Harris, I'm concerned about Harris moving forward. And then any of the Denver backs, I don't want a piece of. All right, that's the top 30 at the running back position for this week. Again, if you guys have any questions, drop them down below in the comments. And, of course, join our Discord. Any questions to go back and forth on, I'd love to do that in the Discord as well. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.